you can see, I've recut my bending caul into a tighter circular profile. I showed you some of the technique where I used a negative sanding block, and by flipping the sandpaper this way or that way in succession, we were able to zero in on a perfect circular shape on each piece. Of course, I only care about this one. I won't be putting this aluminium cladding on the end because we're not going to be doing any hot bending. On the other hand, for some of the thicker pieces, which I didn't have the foresight to leave some waste on either end, it's going to be very hard to bend that using this jig. So for these thicker pieces only, I think I might anneal them and see if I can rehabilitate this original bending caul, and we'll see how that goes. I've just been measuring the thickness of all of these pieces, finding the positions where the thickness is a whole number of millimeters, and finding the positions where the thickness is a half a millimeter difference. Unfortunately, the numbers are all over the place, and so what I'm going to be doing, rather than hand calibrating each piece separately, because measurement error is a thing, I'm going to be just kind of finding the spacing between the whole millimeters and the half millimeters and kind of evening it out for each piece. I've calculated the gradient, that is the distance between the positions where the thickness differs by a millimeter. That ranges from 64 down to 52. I kind of really wish that they were all 55 because that represents the best average target for the difference in action between a bass string and a treble string on a guitar. Next, I'll be using a compass spike and a set square to rule lines corresponding to 0.2 of a millimeter. And finally, I'm going to be using some numeric digit punches to put numbers on the whole millimeter lines. We have our 6 workpieces ranging from the electric guitar through the roughing in stage of an acoustic bass guitar. The thinner ones, fortuitously, have a little bit of waste at the end, which is going to make bending in this compensated springback bend mould a little bit easier. The very thickest of them, I believe I will be able to bend in the original mould, around which I've placed a full hardwood jacket, but I'm going to need to anneal it first, hence the heat source. This one is a little bit thinner, so I'm going to give it a go in that, and we'll have to decide what to do later. So I need to check it against my radius checking device. There's been more spring back than I had anticipated. So whether we'll be able to go persuade the last little bit in this, I'll just have to give it a go. Not as much bend as I wanted. In my experiments with a piece of scrap aluminium, this radius, once you just gave it a bend, it would spring back to the perfect 11-inch radius. With the gradation of thickness, it appears the spring back depends on the thickness, and the thicker stuff springs back less and the thinner stuff springs back a lot. Hence I've got to use a little piece of shim and my mould and a lot of hammering by hand. It's not what I was hoping for. I'll press on with these other two longer pieces. This is going to be the electric guitar, and these two are very similar. They're the roughing in stage for an electric guitar and the target stage for an acoustic guitar, and also an electric bass. That's no good. It's sprung itself out of the clamp. Bit of repair work needed there. An awful lot of winging it and back and forthing. This is now pretty true to the radius. As I say, it's not the sort of engineered precision, process driven method that I was hoping for. We'll see how it goes on this one. That has a soft spot. I wonder how that happened. My guess is that the heating in the drum sander must have annealed a section of aluminium there. That's going to make it tricky. Paradoxically, of course, it bends a lot better and easier, so I'll have to do less hammering on this, but it's not quite there yet. The three thinner, longer pieces are now pretty close to our target radius, but they're not nearly as smooth and perfect and precise as I'd liked. They will nevertheless be useful in their function, with the accuracy not quite to the absolute micron level that I was aiming for. This model, which I have labelled C, and is the roughing in stage of an acoustic guitar, is too thin to really bend well in the springback jig, and a bit too thin for me to be happy with it in its annealed form. So I'm going to see if I can do it with this by hand hammering method. These two thicker pieces I will anneal. Particularly in the thickest, there's not going to be any problem with the softer aluminium. What do you know it? That one is remarkably close, just after a bend in this thing, without any spare on the end to aid in the smoothness and levering of the bend. I'll still give it some hammers because it's not quite right at the ends, but a lot better than I'd hoped. That's hot enough because it's charring a little twig of wood, sliver of pine. So I'll let that cool for a little bit. Then we'll test the annealing and then do the thicker one. Oh yeah, safety. I forgot. Whoops. As I expected, the two thicker pieces, after being annealed, bent very, very easily. And surprisingly, you can almost see the lines on the reverse of the piece from the score lines that I made on the front. So yeah, the metal behaves very, very differently when it's annealed. So what have we learnt? We've learnt that the sisal polishing wheel with the black cutting compound seems to introduce as many scratches as it takes away. So if one has taken care with sandpaper, the calico wheel with the white cutting compound is probably the best way to go. Second thing I've learnt is that all of that operations leaves a mess that's fairly difficult to clean off. So I'm going to have a couple of goes on this because each go seems to leave a bit behind, particularly from my own fingers. A couple of goes later, they are cleaning up nicely. I want to spray a sort of a clear coat over the top. I think I might give them some acetone first, because the residue kind of goes down into the grooves that we scored and also into the numbers that we punched. I don't know whether we'll entirely get that out. I mean, technically it makes them easier to see, doesn't it? Indeed, a couple of goes of acetone leaves them positively gleaming, and although yes, there's a bit of pigment down in the number punch recesses, I don't think I'm going to be able to worry about that. This is what they look like. I'm not sure that the clear coat is either necessary nor beneficial. It adds the minutest amount to the thickness, and it was supposed to simply stop oxidation, but I think in the environment in which I keep it and use it, oxidation may not be a problem. And of course I can always strip the clear coat off if I feel they would be better without it. So the question is, are these new pieces better than the original action arc? This one was very good as an action target if the fret wire height and of course the curvature are fixed. But this was not very good, or indeed useful at all, for measuring how much we need to file off the saddle. So I was forced to use this or this. Rather than theorise, why don't we give it a go? Let's check out the competition first. Now I happen to know that this is out by about 1/3 of a millimetre, plus it's very difficult to see. Even if I bring a light right up against it, if I do the arithmetic in my head, I can come up with an answer that I know to be correct. But it's not easy. I can also use this to get the accurate measurement by getting the angle right in 2 dimensions, which is very, very difficult to do. Or I can slide this under Hear that? 3.1.
Accuracy made easy.
Very, very easy to measure. And then the piece that will act as our target just sits there and acts as our target as we lower the saddle on all the strings. Now, I won't make you watch me do a setup because firstly you've already seen one if you have watched my earlier videos, and secondly I'm really bad at it. Okay, I'll show you just a little bit. I've taken the saddle down, particularly the E and B strings. There is my target action arc sitting there, and I'm pretty much there on most of the strings except the B and the E are still too high. So I slide the action arc forward until we get buzz, and I can see that both the B and E strings are at 2.6 millimeters. It's that easy. I subtract from those 2.6 my desired heights for those strings, double the difference, file that into the saddle. It's certainly much easier than these methods, and it's certainly an improvement over my original action arc. Back to work. All done. Is this set up to a standard you would expect from a guitar store tech? Sadly, no. Have I fixed the action problems on this guitar? Yes. Did these devices outperform these and this? Absolutely 100%. Should you make a set yourself? Only if you have access to a milling machine with a good face mill head, or at a pinch an end mill bit with as large a diameter as possible. Do not do what I did and use a drum sander or a drill press. You are likely to ruin both. If you know more about metallurgy and the best ways of bending, I suspect that the ideal way would be to anneal, then bend, then harden. There are shops that will harden aluminium for you, I believe. But if you know more than me about this, please comment below. I've been Trevor Magnuson. Check in from time to time. I'm going to be making more videos like this. Cheers.